Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. If that Brahman is infinite, this phenomenal world is also infinite. But this is only a projection of that. Nevertheless, if this is taken away, that remains infinite as before. Om. Peace to the individuals, peace to the planets, and peace to the animals. So we're studying Isha Upanishad, and we'll read the verses we've covered before. So in this changing world, everything is subject to change, yet everything is covered by the Lord. Practice renunciation and be strong in the consciousness of the self. Do not run after anybody's wealth. A man may wish to live for 100 years performing his duties as prescribed by the scriptures. Well, man, if you do your duties in this way, then the results of whatever you do will not cling to you. There is no other way. There are worlds known to be sunless and fit for demons. They are enveloped in darkness, such as with the blind, in other words, those devoid of self-knowledge experience. Those people who have neglected the attainment of self-knowledge and have thus committed suicide, as it were, are doomed to enter those worlds after death. Brahman is one without a second. It never moves, yet it goes faster than the mind. It is always ahead. The sense organs can never catch up with it. It is still, yet it defeats all in a race. By its power, the Lord who dwells in space upholds water and everything else in the phenomenal world. That Brahman moves and it does not move. It is far off and it is also nearby. That Brahman is inside of this and is also its outside. He who sees everything in himself and himself in everything never hates anything. When a person knows that he himself has become everything and he knows the oneness of things, how can he hate or love anything? He, the Self, is all-pervasive, radiant, without a form, without any defect, immaculate, untainted, all-knowing, the master of his own mind, the best of all, of independent origin and eternal. He dispenses to each his due. Those who mechanically perform sacrifices, avidya, go into a darkness that is like being blind. But those who merely worship gods and goddesses, avidya, go into a deeper darkness. Scholars say that the path of avidya, performing agnihotra and other sacrifices, and the path of vidya, worshipping gods and goddesses, produce different results. Wise men confirm this. He who worships gods and goddesses, vidya, and also performs sacrifices, avidya, attains immortality by sacrifices, avidya, and attains bliss by worshipping gods and goddesses, vidya. Those who worship the unmanifested and the causal state of the world go into a darkness that is like being blind. But those who worship the manifested, the world we see around us, go into a deeper darkness. So this is a verse we got to last week, and I'll read the commentary again first. So asambhuti, unmanifested, and sambhuti, manifested. Indian philosophy does not believe in creation. It does not agree that something can be created out of nothing. There must be a cause before there can be an effect. The cause may not be seen, but it must have existed at some time. For instance, there is a big banyan tree before you. Where did it come from? It came from a seed lying underground. The seed was lying there unseen, but it was there all the same. It cannot be said that it did not exist. So the tree was in the seed, lying unmanifested, and now it has become manifested. So all that we see around us, the plants, the vast sky, the mountains, rivers, plains, forests, human beings, animals, etc., all were at one time unmanifested. They were a part of asambhuti. Asambhuti is the same as prakriti, nature, and it is a state where all the forces are in harmony with each other. Indian philosophy gives the names sattva, rajas, and tamas to the three forces. So long as there is harmony among these three forces, and there is no manifestation, it is difficult to describe what exists. It is unspecified existence, like an ocean without ripples. It is infinite, unvarying oneness. But somehow or other, at a certain point, the harmony is disturbed. Why it is disturbed, no one knows. It is, perhaps, in the very nature of things that this disharmony should take place. This is the starting point of sambhuti, or manifestation. The one becomes many. The many was in the one, and then it becomes manifest. Its first manifestation is called Hiranyagarbha, of the firstborn. So whether you worship asambhuti or sambhuti, the result is the same. You are groping in the dark. You may know nothing about asambhuti, yet you may worship it anyway. Perhaps you worship it out of fear or from the expectation of getting something you desire. In either case, you are blind and helpless, and you are constantly afraid of the unknown. You are worse off, however, when you worship sambhuti, the manifested world. There are things in it that frighten you, and there are also things that tempt you. Either way, the result is not good. You are a helpless slave. To emphasize this, your condition is described as being in greater darkness. So, but Vedanta tells you to look inside yourself. Yourself is supreme. So long as you are a slave to anything outside yourself, you can never be happy. Vedanta tells you to be your own master. So the world that we see as being manifested in front of us is only like the outermost expression of things underlying that manifested world that we see right now is the unmanifested. And in fact, the cause of everything that happens here lies in the unmanifested. And then it expresses itself and takes shape, in the manifestation. For example, we used in the past, we used the example of when you see somebody building a house. You know that you see them working, you see them sawing wood, hammering nails and things, and you say the house was created because these people, did a lot of hard physical work. But actually, the source of that work was the idea that was in the mind, the concept that was in the mind of the architect. What we saw at the physical level was just a working out, an expression of something that was at a more subtle level. Now, if you go even deeper than that, you find that beyond our mind, beyond our thoughts and ideas, there's this unmanifested causal reality. And ultimately, it is finding expression. This is in Tantra. They say that creation, it starts in God as a very subtle vibration. And then gradually that subtle vibration begins to percolate down through various levels of matter to grosser and grosser. And finally, it expresses itself here as a kind of gross physical phenomenon. But the source of everything is ultimately back in this very subtle No. Now, in Hindu philosophy, they call this creative principle as Hiranyagarbha, or sometimes Ishvara, the Lord, or the idea of the cosmic mind. And this, we use this example to explain creation before, how when you think of creation in terms of the creation of an author who's creating a whole world, full of characters and everything, but yet that world is contained only within his mind, then you have some idea of what it is meant by creation. So this whole universe is contained within the mind of Hiranyagarbha, and everything in it is like ideas within that mind. And this Sri Ramakrishna actually experienced this. When he was in Bhava Mukha, the state between Nirvikalpa Samadhi, completely merged in Brahman, and being aware of the outside world, he said that point he saw everything as ideas within the cosmic mind and expressing itself. So, in other words, the idea, the thing to remember is that what we experience here in our daily life and so on is only the effect, the result of things that are going on at a more subtle level. Now, normally, when we are dissatisfied with our life, we're dissatisfied with the way things are going, or we're dissatisfied with somebody, then we try to change that person, we try to change that situation in the external. We never think of changing ourselves, of changing our state of consciousness, of kind of going within, but that's actually the source of what is happening here. Now, when we're living only entirely in this world, we're not aware of anything that's going on. And this is the great majority of people. We just think whatever's happening, the cause of it is what I'm experiencing, in the physical state. Not realizing that the causes, it's the end result of something that started much higher up. And so, yogis, people like that, and also people who do miracles or something, they have started to go within, back towards the creative forces that are actually operating here. So physically, let's say somebody's sick, well, physically we can give medicine, he can go to a hospital, we can treat him, but there are some people who can actually secure the person through because they're controlling these subtle forces. What we call miracles are actually not miracles. They're not kind of unnatural things, but they're an expression of kind of the subtle causes that express themselves here. So the more inward a person goes, the more subtle his consciousness becomes, the more he's getting to the causes of things. So for example, if a person is very extroverted, very just totally absorbed in this world, he basically has very little idea of what makes him act the way he does. And this, many people, they go through life creating all kinds of problems for themselves without any idea of why. But when a person becomes more introspective, they gradually become aware, oh, this is what's causing me to act the way I do. And when a person becomes aware of it, then he can decide, well, I don't want this or I want this. And then he begins to struggle to try to change what the state of his mind is. And then that in turn begins to change the life he experiences. And the deeper you go, the more inwards, the more subtle you become, the more you get in touch with the real forces that are trying to express themselves. Now we mentioned, some weeks ago we read a chapter on the Tree of Life. The idea that everything has its source back in the universal kind of cosmic power, and it is ready to function through us in all its wisdom, all its glory, all its love, all its power. Everything is there. But when we're living primarily out of a sense of ego, out of a sense of individuality that's separate from everything else, then we're not connected with that underlying creative force. And then what we read, or what we get, is basically what we create. But always the possibility is there that as you begin to shift from this sense of separate ego being in charge of everything to the sense of God being there and me being, kind of connected with God, then you see that kind of power can begin to flow, and then you begin to express not just your human ideas, your human desires and feelings and so on. You begin to express the divinity that's there within us. See, God in all His glory also is there within each and every individual. But for countless ages or centuries, we have blocked that out. We said, no, leave me alone, I'm in charge here. And so then we're not aware of it. It doesn't function then in our life. But as soon as you become aware of it, as soon as you kind of open up a connection, a channel with it, then it begins to function. And then you see how kind of wonderful transformations begin to take place when it begins to operate. And so, when they speak about worshiping, the manifested or unmanifested, they're talking about these kind of two aspects of creation. One, the manifested that we see and experience, that's expressed here with all the different forms, all the different individuals. Underlying that is the unmanifested, the source out of which it all comes. And when you're aware of the unmanifested, you're also much more aware of actually what's going on. Most of the time, all of our attention is fixed on forms, and we like some of the forms we don't like. Some of the forms we react differently, with different people in different situations. But as a person begins to become spiritual, as it begins to move towards the spirit, the forms become less important, and the underlying kind of consciousness begins to become kind of more effective. Now, realized soul, somebody who's realized God, who's realized self or something, he's not unaware of the world. He sees the people, he sees what's going on, but he doesn't see it as reality. He sees it, yes, it's there, it's a scene before me, but he sees through it and sees that it's actually divinity, that everything is God, everything is consciousness. Maya was just recently visited with Swami Varadananda in Seattle, and he said he was telling her that everything is consciousness. He said, I'm consciousness, this table is consciousness, you're consciousness. So he's kind of reached that state, but that's, in other words, when you're seeing in those terms, then this form or that form, it's all the same consciousness, all the same divinity. And this is your whole experience then becomes transformed from a constant battle or struggle with things you don't like, things you do like, trying to get what you want, trying to avoid what you don't want, all of this reaction. Instead, you're focusing on the underlying reality of things, and then you see the forms become kind of secondary. It's like the forms are like the clothes a person wears. Now, you look at one person, they're very nicely dressed, and so you tend to feel attracted to that person. Another person is kind of very shoddy dressed, and then you don't feel so comfortable. But we all know that the person is not the clothes. The person who's all dressed up, real nice, can be a really rotten human being, and the person who's in raggedy clothes can be the most wonderful, saintly person. So we realize that just there's expression, clothes make the man, but that's not true. It actually is the man is something different. The inner reality, and we learn to look beyond kind of the dress to see the real person. In the same way, you begin to look beyond the form to see the underlying divinity there. Each and every person is actually God, is actually divine consciousness expressing itself. And we tend to look at that person and say, oh, he's good or he's bad, he's got these qualities, he's got those qualities, these things I like, these things I don't like, and all like that. We're seen as a very kind of limited human being with good and bad, but not realizing that it's actually God Himself that's within that form. And so, as a person begins to shift his attitude from the appearances, from the clothes, from the forms, to the underlying divinity of things, then your whole experience gets transformed. And at first, part of it, one aspect of it, is developing a sense of detachment towards the forms. And this seems kind of rather negative, difficult for many people, to kind of back off from the things you experience in your life, you know, whatever you kind of back off from it. You don't, an important thing is you don't depend on the forms. You don't depend on other people, on other things, on other situations for your happiness, for your satisfaction. You don't need anything. Because you begin to find all your satisfaction, your happiness, you begin to find within yourself. As long as you're clinging desperately to somebody else to make you happy, then it's a very confining type of relationship. And as we know, in relationships, when love, what we call love, is based upon attachment, that very same love can easily become hatred, can easily become anger, because when you're depending upon the other person to make you happy, and then that other person fails to do that, then you act with frustration and anger, like you do in most frustrated desires, and that leads to all kinds of things, all kinds of fights and things. I don't know, I tell you, Swami Varadananda, when he was here, I forget if I told you this before, but the joke he told, he said, he was talking about marriage, and he said, in the first year of marriage, the husband speaks and the wife listens. He said, second year of marriage, the wife speaks and the husband listens. He said, third year of marriage, they both speak and the neighbors listen. So like that, we find that things start out wonderfully well, and then they can turn very bad, because that person who gave me joy at one point is now become a pain in the neck, and so you just react. But if you're not depending on that person for your happiness, on the other hand, if you actually want that person to be happy, and this is what happens as you begin to shift from being kind of selfish in your outlook to being unselfish, is that instead of, when you find you don't need anything from anybody else, then instead of becoming a grabber, trying to get everything out of life, you begin to become a giver sharing. And this is as the true spiritual person, the true mystic, as he begins to experience the kind of the wonderful glory of God, the desires are to share. And sharing means you just give it with no thought at all of whether you're going to get anything back out of it. Whether the person's going to be grateful or anything else, you just, everything is freely given. You remember in Swami Vivekananda's Gita, how he had the one commentary on Karma Yoga about the different attitudes towards work. You know, he said competition, cooperation, and consecration. Competition means we're fighting everybody else to get ahead. Cooperation means we were able to work together and accomplish more by not fighting. But then consecration means everything is done as an offering, as a gift, with no thought of what's in it for me. And so, like that, your whole attitude begins to shift when you realize the one self is there within everybody else also. As long as we're seeing things in terms of me and you, me and everybody else, then there's conflict. Invariably, there's going to be conflict. Even when we're basically friends, we basically get along, there's still going to be some bumping into each other. But when you're living out of a sense of oneness, then there's no conflict because there's only the one self there. And what comes to you out of that oneness is going to be the best, not only for you, but for everybody else. Yeah? So like that, as you begin to shift from your attempt to grab things, to grab people, to grab your happiness and so forth from other people, and you begin to kind of stand back, detach from it, and just kind of let it be, then you begin gradually to move into this unselfish sense of unity, of being in harmony with the unity of things, and that begins to kind of flow through you. And then, because you're now kind of reconnected with the tree of life, you see how that divine, all the divine qualities can begin to flow through you and flow out. Ultimately, that's the idea, is that whatever progress we make in the spiritual life is ultimately not for us, just for our own happiness or satisfaction. It's ultimately to become an instrument in the hands of God so that it can express itself in the world. And so the less kind of selfishness we have, the less we're focused on forms, the less we're focused on our personal welfare, the more that underlying unity is able to express itself. And wherever it is experienced in even like a small way, the person becomes transformed. He becomes an instrument of good in the world, kind of a blessing in the world. And this is of our own self. We can't really bless anybody, but when we connect with that reality, which is the self of all, then wherever we go, we become a blessing. It's like once we have the light, wherever we go, the light shines. We don't do it. We don't, and actually, truly spiritual people, they don't think in terms of doing good to the world. Of going, oh, I've got to save that person, I've got to cure that person, I've got to do this. They simply stay connected with God, and automatically, wherever they go, they bring a blessing that has capacity to uplift the consciousness of everybody around them. And so, so this is the idea. Now in this, in the Upanishad, we're talking about the manifest and unmanifest, and about worshipping the one or the other, or either worshipping the visible universe that we see, or the causal universe that we see. But ultimately, as he said in the commentary, he said, but Vedanta tells you that to look inside yourself. Yourself is supreme. So long as you're a slave to anything outside yourself, you can never be happy. Vedanta tells you to be your own master. Now the idea, what this means is that even when you think of Hiranyagarbha, you think of cosmic mind, you think even though you become one with the cosmic mind, so it's one with the whole universe, that's still not what you're seeking, because you're still consciousness, which is actually Chit, which is actually Brahman, experiencing something. Right now, we're experiencing our individual kind of personal life. As we kind of advance in consciousness, we can expand and experience higher levels of consciousness. But Brahman and the real self that's there within us is actually, it is consciousness itself, it's Brahman itself, it is something much higher than even the entire universe. This entire universe is like a little bubble in Brahman. So, in other words, this is a Vedantic position, that is, as long as you attach to something, attach to some experience, and you say, this experience is what I am, then you become limited by that experience and you're not aware of who actually is having the experience. When you become aware of who is actually having the experience, then you discover that the consciousness which is having the experience is the consciousness, not just your personal consciousness. The whole sense of personal comes because that consciousness is identified with a particular body, particular mind, and so forth, and takes on that identity, becomes limited, confined to that identity. But actually the consciousness, the real self, is just the pure chip, the pure consciousness which is infinite, which is totally unlimited. But also, equally, is the self in all. And this is where selfishness and unselfishness comes in. He said, as Swami Vivekananda said, that selfishness is contraction, and contraction is death. Unselfishness is expansion, and expansion is life. The idea is that when you become selfish, what it means is that you become smaller and smaller and smaller, so that your whole consciousness is centered on what's happening to this body. Whereas when you become unselfish, your consciousness begins to expand and grow and include other people. First of all, usually your family and children and things like that, but friends, other things, eventually more and more people. And what this means is that your consciousness is growing. In other words, consciousness, by its very nature, is infinite. But our experience of consciousness can vary drastically depending on what kind of shape we give to it. So as you think, you become, whatever kind of thoughts and things you put into your consciousness, that kind of determines what you experience. The more we think in kind of small terms, the more we think in negative terms, that's kind of the reality we're creating for ourselves, the world we're creating. And it becomes kind of very small and very confining. As we begin to expand, then we're gradually moving back into the infinite nature of our consciousness, the infinite, unlabeled, unbound nature of our consciousness. And there's people there?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. They're just wondering where I am. Yeah, okay. Anyway, actually today is July 4th, and it's the symbol of American liberty, and Swami Vivekananda greatly prized July 4th. As you know, he wrote a poem to July 4th, and he loved America especially because it represented freedom. And he even left the body on July 4th. And Swami Prabhupada too, in Hollywood, he also left the body on July 4th. And consciously, I mean, they say, okay, this is when I'm going to go. And so, but the idea of freedom is that that's our nature. When you realize that you're one with the whole universe, you're one with everything, you contain everything, then where's the limitation? Right now, as human beings, we find ourselves very limited. You know, we would like to go to Bermuda, but we can't afford it. So we like this, and we can't afford it, and we want this, and that person doesn't agree. We're always running into limitations and frustrations and barriers. But as you go back towards your true self, all these limitations, all these barriers and confinements, they begin to disappear. It's like at the physical level, which where we're at now, like I said, you run into constant frustrations, constant things you like to do, but you can't, and so forth. But if you go even a little bit deeper into the mental level, then you can think about practically anything you want. You know, if you want to go to China, you can just picture it in your mind, and you can be there in an instant. You don't have to get on a plane and go through all this. And like that, the deeper you go, the more into what you go, the more kind of free and unlimited you become. the more focus you do, you become more limited. And worse than that, many people, they make their lives limited. You know, they make their lives miserable. Because of their thoughts and emotions and things like that, they get so such a mess, and that becomes their world, their experience. So, but yet all the time, the whole all God's infinite reality is all there and can be experienced by anyone who wants to, who kind of moves in that direction. You know, Joel Goldsmith, I don't know if I said this before about the chicken and the egg. He used the example that a little chicken is inside his egg. And as far as that chicken knows, that's the whole reality. All he knows is the darkness that's there inside his egg. But then at one point, he begins to peck on the egg. And slowly as he picks away, suddenly a little hole gets a little bit of light comes in, and so then he keeps pecking. Eventually he breaks out of the egg, and he discovers this whole vast barnyard there, this whole vast world that he didn't know that was there. Well, we as human beings, we're locked inside our minds, we're locked inside our humanity, thinking this daily life that I'm living, this is the whole thing. Never realize that there's a whole vast universe there that is available to us, if only we can kind of break out of that shell. And so this is the difference, and the more you're surging into matter, into the physical world, and so forth, the more you're kind of going into darkness. As you begin to come out of it, then you begin to open up and discover that there's things beyond anything that you'd ever dreamed of. First thing that starts to happen, is that your life starts to get a little better. Your state of mind, your kind of moods and things starts to improve. And slowly things are just getting better, but eventually, when you're really kind of seeking it, you break out of that shell of my very small self. And there's then no limit to what can open up to you. And Sri Krishna said that realization, it was like a fish that's been kept in a little basket full of water. He said, and then you take that fish and you put it back into the ocean. And he said, this is what the soul feels like when it attains realization. He says, it's gone from such a small kind of existence to suddenly the whole vast ocean is there. And like that, our whole experience it's not about making this life better. Although some of that is getting better health, getting better, peace of mind, things like that. So that's a part of it. But really, it's going beyond that altogether. Then you begin to become truly kind of the spiritual or mystical, and then eventually you become aware that what's there, the reality of what's there, is infinite, and that infinity is you. It's also everybody else. It's not yours personally, but it's there at the core of your being, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do. So this is as long as the person is focused on any particular thing that he wants to get, like we mentioned before, how in these yagnas, these ancient worships, there was always usually a purpose behind it. Some sort of benefit they expected to get out of performing the worship. In the same way, in worshiping gods and goddesses and things like that, there's usually some kind of personal motive that the person wants. And so he may get that desire. And he does the worship properly, he may get the benefits of it and so forth, but that's kind of not the ultimate goal. And even, like I said, even becoming one with your Anugara, the cosmic, is still not the ultimate goal, because beyond that is Brahman itself. And it's Brahman itself, this is what we really are. But the more you approach that, the more of the infinite nature of things and of yourself begins to unfold. But in Vedanta, they say, don't worry about heaven, don't worry about all these other things, try to focus on the ultimate goal. And see, the thing is, if you focus, see kind of the ultimate truth of God, then other things will be added. As Christ says, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all things will be added unto you. If you seek the things, you may get the things, but you won't get God. You won't get heaven. You won't get the kind of higher reality. But as you move towards that higher reality, then kind of wonderful things can come to you, but not when you're focused on the things. And I say, you focus on God, you focus on the Spirit, and with that, everything else comes. It's like Ramakrishna said that the breeze of God's grace is always blowing, but we have to unfurl our sails. But the grace of God, it doesn't mean that He does a favor for us. That He fixes some problem for us, or He does this or that, like we usually pray for. God is the grace. That as you experience God, then the grace comes. And with it, it brings all kinds of other kind of benefits as the added things. But as long as you're seeking the added things, you may get them, but you don't get God. But if you just seek God, then everything else can begin to come. And the special thing about kind of spiritual life or spiritual progress that we've mentioned before is that the benefits, what you get here, the spiritual brings happiness with it. That when we seek the things of the world, we mentioned many times, we seek money. A person wants to make $1 million, so he makes $1 million, but it doesn't mean he's happy. He may be totally miserable, but as you move in the other direction, you begin to move towards God. Whatever you get, it brings happiness and peace with it. And this is why, when they talk of renunciation and so forth, it's ultimately things just drop away. That as you get this higher thing, then your dependence, your need on, I need this, or I need that, those things just begin to just fall away because they're unimportant anymore. Because you found something much better. And you found something, the source of your happiness and your peace and the sense of the reality of your being. And as you begin to experience that, then you don't have to go running chasing this thing or that thing. And so it brings with it at every stage, it brings with it its own kind of happiness. And as we mentioned before, the idea is that if you're happy, all of your experiences are happy. Maybe you have money, maybe you don't, it's not important. But if you're saying, I need to have this in order to be happy, or I need to have that, and if all your attention is focused on getting a hold of this, half the time you're frustrated because you don't have it, and then you get it and you may find yourself disappointed. But if you're happy, though, all the experiences that come are happy. But if you're not happy, then no matter what experiences you get in terms of it won't make you happy. So we'll come down to verse 13. Anya devahu sambhavad adhyada uras sambhavad yiti sushruma kiranam ye nasta dvi chakshire. So scholars say that the worship of Sambhuti, Hiranyagarbha, in Asambhuti, Prakriti, produce different results, and wise men confirm this. So earlier, Shankara pointed out the futility of worshipping nature, manifested and unmanifested. By worshipping manifested nature, Hiranyagarbha, You might at best acquire some extraordinary powers. What nature does is breathtaking. By worshipping her, you can perhaps do some of the things she does, that's all. But if you worship unmanifested nature, you also become unmanifested, and you become one with her. So what you worship, you become. This is the common belief. So what you worship, you become. This is, I think, often not really understood, particularly by people, is that if you worship a particular form, you tend to think, okay, that form is there, it's kind of a separate person, and I worship it. But ultimately what happens is that your consciousness is beginning to take kind of the shape of that form that you worship, and then more and more of the nature of the thing you worship becomes a part of your nature. And this, you remember the pictures we had from Swami Varadananda in his meditation spiritual life. How a person starts out with a very kind of physical concept, you know, say Krishna or whatever form, and thinks in very physical terms. Gradually, though, as he goes on with the practice, he begins to realize that that form is only an expression of underlying divinity. And as he goes on, he begins to realize that the same divinity which is expressed in that form, that same divinity is also within me, to a much lesser extent. But like that it goes until a person attains the realization of the one divinity pervading everything, which is taking shape as your Ishtam, as your particular, but also taking shape as you too, as everything. And so like Swami Varadananda said, you know, that consciousness is everything, you know, it's taking all the shapes. So, and that consciousness, which has become everything, is what is the ultimate goal to find in Vedanta. The shapes, the different forms it takes, well, that's like a temporary thing. But eventually you reach the underlying, the universal, one consciousness, and this is kind of the ultimate goal. And then when you've experienced that, and then you experience that everything is within you. You don't need to go to heaven, you don't need to go to this and have this, because the entire universe, in all its forms, this is what you are. And so any questions on what we've done here? So this, the basic idea in Jnana Yoga or in Vedanta is that you're the witness. You're the consciousness which is aware of things. And as we studied the 13th chapter of the Gita, that whatever you experience, there's the thing you experienced, and there's the one who experiences it, Kshetra and Kshetragni. And the problem is, because when the experience comes, we identify with the experience and say, this is what I am. And then we become kind of limited, confined to that particular experience. But when we get back to the awareness that we're actually the consciousness, which is experiencing different things, then that consciousness is unlimited. It's not confined to any particular form or any particular experience. It's the kind of one, the chit, the one universal consciousness. And this is what is kind of the ultimate goal. Through your various kinds of worship of different aspects of nature, you can go through all kinds of experiences, some very happy, some very high experiences, but what you're seeking is something that's underlying kind of all the experiences. When you get an experience, you get something that may be very good, and it can be very wonderful, but it's not, it's still limited. It's not the oneness, it's not the reality of what's there. But when you get the reality, then all experiences are there. And you remember that Swami Varadananda, in his set of drawings that he'd done, he mentioned how that once a person has attained realization, then he can go anywhere in the universe. Whatever he experiences in is God, and there's no limit to the experiences that he can have. Right now, we're very limited to what we can experience because all we can do is kind of what's here. But this is kind of the main theme in this Isha Upanishad particularly, is that there's one universal consciousness. There's only one thing in existence, and all of it, that's what we are, and that's what everybody else is. As long as we are kind of cut off, down, and limited down to one kind of small individual, we're not aware of that. But if we begin to realize, think in terms that there's actually nothing but God, everything is God, then you begin to slowly move back into that infinite existence. Okay, so any questions? Okay, Swami Isha is coming back tomorrow. He's supposed to get back about noon. And then, so he's coming to the talk on Sunday on why we should meditate. Then the following weekend, Swami Varadananda is going to be here from San Diego. He's going to do a workshop on puja, on how to do puja. And that'll be from 4:30 till 6:45. Then, this is on Saturday the 12th. And then after the workshop, we have arati from 7:30 to 7:30. We will do a fairly brief Guru Purnima puja. And then we'll serve food afterwards.
Swamiji, I was thinking of, you mentioned that when you are in unmanifested state, you are not in darkness, but when you are in manifested state, you are in deeper darkness. What does that mean? How do I, number one, how do I know that I'm in unmanifested state and therefore I'm in darkness, but manifested state, I'm in deeper darkness?
Yeah. Well, this is, like I said, these verses, certain verses here are kind of confusing, difficult to understand. But the idea that anything other than the ultimate realization of Brahman is considered darkness. And earlier said that those who do sacrifices are in darkness, but those who worship gods and goddesses are in greater darkness. They may be wonderful experiences by our standards, but it's not, it's a distraction from realizing Brahman, kind of. And so, if you look at the universe, by worshipping Sambhuti, the manifested, it's been about like scientists. They're out conquering the world, kind of. They're finding new inventions, understanding more about nature and how it works, everything like that. All of their attention is focused there, and they're achieving wonderful things in terms of nature. But they're not and they're coming up with very Vedantic truths, actually, about from their study. But it's not the same as knowing Brahman. And same with the unmanifested, you get to the causes that express itself here is kind of a much more higher state in a way, but it's not the Brahman, which is beyond even that, which is beyond the universe altogether. In other words, everything, at any level of the universe, of the Prakriti, you have nature and you have the consciousness, which is witnessing it. And so, we can experience Prakriti at many different levels, from a very small level to very, very high levels, like the cosmic beings and gods and things, all those things, but it's still kind of within Prakriti. And you remember in Swami Vivekananda was talking about evolution in London, and he was saying that evolution takes place within nature, within Prakriti. And he used the example, he said that suppose there's a veil between me and the audience, between me and you. And then I don't see you at all. I don't see anything. But then I poke a little hole in the veil. And now I look through and I can see maybe one face of the audience. And then as I make the hole bigger, gradually more and more of the audience is revealed until if the whole veil is removed, then I can see clearly. But all of that were changes that took place in the veil. I didn't change at all. And the same way, the Atma, the self, the real self that we are, it doesn't change at all. It can, what it experiences can be heaven or hell, can be very small or can be very large, and different experiences come. And as a person's kind of on the right path, those experiences can expand so that more and more of the vast nature of Prakriti is experienced, but the self, which was experiencing it, is already perfect. Changes in nature have nothing to do, no effect on it. And this is the idea. We tend to think, in spiritual life, in terms of getting better and better and better, but actually we're already perfect. But simply we have to become aware of it. So we can go through a process of better and better and better and having our kind of Prakriti open up more and more to us, or we can discover that we're Atman, and then nothing can affect that, nothing's changed that. It's what we always are, what we've always been. We're children of immortal bliss, and find that, and then everything you get at once. It's like the story of Parvati and Ganesh and Subramanyam. That Parvati told her she would give her necklace to the one who could, discover the whole nature. And so Subramanyam, he jumped on a peacock and he went all around the whole universe, and then came back and he found that Ganesh was already sitting there with the necklace because he had just walked around the mother. He said, "This is everything right here." And so, like that, you can go out into the world, you can conquer it, you can do, have all kinds of things, and eventually come back to the mother. Or you can just go to the mother. Either way. Okay. Any other questions about that? But in many ways, a spiritual life is like setting out on uncharted seas. We know what this world is like. We know what the experiences in this world are like. Maybe just more or less the same. But when a person has spiritual life, he doesn't know. It's totally new. Things can begin to open up. That's why you need the power of discrimination. That if you have any kind of experiences, stand back afterward. Just say, "Well, is this what I'm seeking? Is this ultimately spiritual, or is it something?" As a person, you can get distracted along the way if you're not careful.
I'm reminded of one example. It comes in the Ramayana. Very similar question. Lord Rama's mother asked Kaushalya, her name was. She asked once, "Rama, you tell me whether you are my son or you are the Lord of the universe, Lord Vishnu." Right. Lord Rama said, "Mother, these questions of religion, of the ultimate truth, the final truth, is not a matter of debate, it's not a matter of argument, it's only a matter of experience." So you think that this situation that you are explaining is a matter of experience and not a matter of discussion or arguments? If it is a matter of experience, then question comes, Kaushalya asked, "How would I experience it?" Yeah. And he said, "Mother, one day you will experience it, you will see." He then taught the yoga of bhakti, devotion. He said, "Mother, you should have an unflinching devotion towards God, unflinching devotion with deep reverence towards God. And if you do that one, then slowly and gradually you will realize yourself, you will experience that what the question you're asking, that will be answered. Otherwise, no matter how many questions you ask, you will not, unless you experience it, you will not find the ultimate truth. Sometimes I keep wondering, I begin to think that did Sri Ramakrishna experience that? Sri Ramakrishna also says that religion is realization, religion is experience. It's not a matter of arguments or debate. And the question is, when will this human soul will realize its own divinity? Is it a matter of time that many lives this person has to go through before he or she realizes that the ultimate truth of God or ultimate consciousness? This is the big question which one always is curious to find out, but I do not know how many people have found the answer to that question.
But that's basically is that the what you can get through reason, through intellect, is not it. You're getting ideas about it, but it's not the same. The only way is to get it is to experience it. And theoretically, it can come in an instant because it's always there. It's never lost. It's never anywhere. But in practical purposes, it depends on kind of how many barriers there are between us and it. And that's what we're doing. It's just removing barriers. Now, the more for a lot of people in the world, they have no interest in it at all. You know, they're busy with other things. But as you are interested, slowly you begin to move in that direction and move away kind of from the other direction, and more get absorbed, and then it begins to kind of open up. Yeah. But it helps. It's like if you're going to take a trip, it's important to look at the map first to get a clear idea of where you're actually going to go, what you're trying to do, and then maybe you'll get there. You know, so the intellectual part is got its place, but reading the map, it doesn't take you any closer to your destination. But you get clear. Okay, this is where I have to go. And same way, the study and things like this, slowly you say, okay, this is what I have to do. And then you begin to do it. And then it begins, eventually it begins to unfold. But the idea is that the body is there, the mind is there, your personality, and different levels, layers are there. But within those layers, deep within is the presence of the self itself. And it comes in a moment of self-forgetfulness, because self-forgetfulness means that for a moment our personal self kind of drops from consciousness, and then the underlying consciousness, we can become aware of it. And so this is an intense concentration, or the various spiritual practices of jnana yoga, bhakti, all these, they help to create that point where the higher self can begin to come in.
There's another thing, Maharaji, in the retreat last weekend, Swami Varadananda discussed that Nastya Sukta.
Yeah. Now that was really a deep kind of
Yes.
sukta.
So I just tried to think about it, and later on I discussed with him privately. See, in short, when he did all the 7 verses of the sutta, there are 7 verses. He did that one. It says, all the first 7 verses say, in short, they say that before the creation of this universe, there was neither light nor darkness, neither death nor immortality. There was nothing was there. Even gods were not there, angels were not there. And then, so I said, Maharaj, if there was nothing was there, then how the world got created, the universe came into being? He said, then he mentioned that point at one point, same thing as Swami Vivekananda mentioned. During the interval, the break, I read that little book again. It was in the bookstore. It's on Hinduism. There's one chapter. When I read that one, even Swamiji says, there was no creation. It was projection. Projection was there. So Swami Yudatma mentioned again and again, it was projection, there was no creation. Then I told him that I have read Maharaj in Google's. I'm not a physicist, a scientist, but I understand some basic theory of physics. The physics say there was a creation, this Big Bang theory. There was a creation. How this creation took place, this is how they explain it. They say there are two forces. One is called the inflationary universe, which developed after theory of relativity, Einstein's theory of relativity. Inflationary universe. It inflates, it expands. And the characteristics of inflationary universe is that once Big Bang took place, it started expanding. The other force is called the contractionary force, which is based on Newton's law of gravitation. He says everything, gravity is there, and it begins to contract. So on one side there's expansion, on the other side the force is contraction. These two forces simultaneously took place when the Big Bang theory occurred. And it appears the scientists are saying, even they are not able to explain, but they say it's their speculation. They say the creation was faster than contraction. So if you conduct an experiment where the creation is suppose at the speed of 10 miles per hour, and the contraction is at the rate of 8 miles per hour, then still you have a 10 minus 8, 2 miles it will expand. And since thousands of years passed, since the Big Bang theory took place, so if every time, every hour, every minute or every year, 2 miles expansion took place, then for thousands of years we find the present universe. That's how it expanded. The scientists believe in that theory. Now I was trying to think, I told Swamiji, then projection theory, what does it say? Projection theory doesn't believe in creation. It says the world got projected. It was the projection of the Atman, of the Brahman. Brahman was not created. Brahman is stable. It is changeless. So how can it be created? And that also is further substantiated, this point, that the Brahman cannot be created. God cannot God. It comes in one point in the Adhyatmika Ramayana also. When Parvati, Holy Mother, asked a question Lord Shiva, and he says about the significance of Rama. Rama is not an ordinary human being. He says this is a cosmic consciousness, and it is a Purushopurana, which means it is most ancient. This is Brahman, is most ancient. It was there even before the creation of this universe in the form of consciousness. So it simply got projected. Lord Shiva says it simply got projected. And that further supports that thesis, the point which the Vedanta says, and the Swami Vivekananda said, and other scriptures say, that there was no creation. It was already there. It simply got projected. And the scientists say, well, we don't know, but the Big Bang, if took place, that there was something. So they say two forces were taking place simultaneously after that one. The one was, they call it inflationary universe, and the other they call contractionary, law of Newton, gravitation. And one is contractionary, the other is expansionary. When the expansion goes faster than, at a faster speed than contraction, then the net result is that there is expansion. And over a long period of time, the universe got expanded, and what we find in the universe is the result of those two forces. So That's an interesting theory also.
Yeah. Well, also I've heard that depending on the amount of mass in the universe, it's possible that the universe will expand up to a certain point and then begin to contract back down. And then again, when it gets back down, then there'll be another big bang, and there'll be a whole other universe. And this is a very Vedantic idea.
That's
it goes kind of over and cyclical.
in cycle,
over,
that's
yeah.
right, in cycles, yes. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. So any other questions or anything? Then I think Oh, and then at the end of the month, of course, then Swami Varadananda, he's going to do his retreat at Ganges from 25th to the 27th on the Taittiriya Upanishad. Om Asatoma Satyamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurma Amritam Gavaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Lord, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. And lead us from death to immortality. Peace,